Hey, hello, beer appreciators. Swadee krab. Welcome to Beer Times Story, the platform where beer and brewing knowledge is shared. I'm glad that we are back, and I hope that you all feel the same way. Now, for today's sessions, we will talk about, of course, beer and brewing. How could it be about other stuff, right? However, it will be from a different perspective, different angle. I promise that, which is really exciting because we are going to have a good burp about evolution of media in the world of beer and brewing. Well, if you really think about it in this modern age, right, it is undeniable that you can easily come across with, all sort of beer and brewing stuff in various type of media, whether it is in print or broadcast or internet or out of home, like those billboard or advertising sign stuff type. It is everywhere out there, regardless of the quality of the what is out there itself. Now, the reason that I bring this thing up is because the age of almost of all this beer and brewing media that we currently have are relatively young, and it is quite hard to imagine what was available even just 20 years ago. And we are talking about 2000s, like folk, it's not too far, and it is pretty amazing and mind-boggling at the same time to visualize how the landscape changes over time. Okay, to further talk about this topic, I believe that our guest speaker can fill us in just right with his stories and experience because he has been in this beer and brewing media arena, boxing ring, so called, for about 20 years. For the coincidence, right? Yeah. So let me introduce him to all of us first. After he received his communication degree in 2004, with his love in talk radio and internet radio, he started working in a radio station. But that is not the only love that he has. He has another passion, and it is about beer and home brewing. So a year later, he combined these two things together. At his rented house in Pacheco, California, he converted his garage into a live radio studio. Then he invited his beer friends, beer folks, to sit down and talk about, of course, beer and brewing. The first episode of his first show he hosted, which is called The Sunday Session, was aired in June 2005, and the name of his live beer radio he founded is The Brewing Network. And it didn't take long for the whole show to catch people attention. And soon after that, many more shows under this The Brewing Network umbrella, sprung. Name like Brewing with Style, Can You Brew It, and Brew Strongs, and many more. And those, have educated many people, including me, in the most entertaining way you could possibly imagine. So please welcome our guest speaker, Justin Crossley.
Hello, thanks for having me, Manapat. I appreciate it. Thanks for the kind words too. It's very nice of you.
Hey, thanks for joining us. And it is good to have you on. You are in one of the lists that I have that must be here.
Yeah, it's an honor. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you are recording this session from your end is from the headquarter, right? The Cochrane.
Yeah, so we built a tap room back in 2014, and I built my studio there. So that's our, I think, our fourth and probably final studio. I hope I don't want to have to move it again. So yeah, that's where I'm at in Concord, California.
Right, right. Good. It's a one of the kind. I mean, awesome place. This the studio and the place that you have over there.
Thank you. Yeah, I was happy to have you get to come see it back in March.
Yeah, the spring brew was wild and good at the same time. And I kind of wish to have the same sort of event happen, here too.
Oh, nice. Let me know.
Yeah,
I want to come out there.
cool. And just curious, like you were just back from the CBC, right? Doing all the live record in Vegas.
Yeah, the Craft Brewers Conference was in Las Vegas, Nevada this year. And
Mhm.
so I was there. I've been live streaming their awards for them for, gosh, since probably 2007 or so. So quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah, long time ago. And have you fully recovered from the event yet?
Barely. I think I finally got the good night's sleep last night that I needed to feel like a human again. It was, if you've never been to Vegas, Vegas is good for about 3 nights maximum. Anything more than that, and you're pushing it. And I was there for a week this time, so
Oh
yeah,
God. So the city almost got you, right?
yeah,
Basically,
almost. I think I took a whole day off while I was there just to recover before I even left. So yeah,
that's a that's a good call.
yeah.
That's a good call. Okay, okay. So, Justin, before we talk about today's topic, I would like to ask you about your background a bit here. Just to have a better understanding of how beer has become your part of your life. So, I understand that you were into beer a long time ago, but speaking about craft beer, non-macro scale beer, do you recall the moment that it really hit you, or like the capture of how you find it and seal the love of craft beer for you?
I'm not sure I remember the moment, but I grew up in the desert in Southern California, which was at the time kind of a beer wasteland. And I
Hmm.
moved up to the San Francisco Bay Area in 1995. And I remember going to a friend's barbecue, and they handed me a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Um,
Okay.
and I thought it was terrible, to be honest with you. It was so bitter, and I had never had anything like it. But
Hmm.
every place I went, I kept going to friends' barbecues and parties. I was young. Um, and all they had was this Sierra Nevada and a couple of other craft beers. And over time, I think my palate just changed. I had a Red Hook ESB, which I don't even think is around anymore. And I really started to change. So for me, it honestly was more of an evolution. And after
Right.
a while, I couldn't go back to those industrial light lagers that I had kind of grown up with. I really couldn't. Um, and I mean, you did put it right. I kind of fell in love with it. I became a musician, and it's how I made my money for a long time. And I would work for pitchers of Sierra Nevada. Like I would just work for craft beer. Um, so honestly, for me, it was very much an evolution. I didn't have some aha moment where I just thought craft beer was going to be my job or anything like that. I just sort of developed this love for it, and I kind of never went back.
Right. So it's more like it's gradually um, gravitates you toward this craft beer world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and the more I got into it, basically while I was in college, my girlfriend bought me a homebrew kit. So I
Hmm.
was going to school for radio and communication, and then I started brewing beer with that homebrew kit. I didn't know it existed. She found it as a birthday gift, um,
Ah,
and that I was instantly in love with. I just thought it was the coolest thing. So that just sort of solidified my love for it. Um, yeah.
cool.
And while doing that, I had all these dumb questions about brewing
Mhm.
beer, but I was surrounded by other brewers here in the Bay Area. My homebrew shop had a lot of good brewers at it. So I could
Mhm.
easily ask these questions. And at the same time, I was searching for what to do with my radio career. And I
Right.
just kind of thought, if I have all these dumb questions about how to brew beer, I bet all the other home brewers do too. And what if I record the questions and answers. I ask somebody that I know. I bring them my friends onto a microphone, so that everybody could hear the answer. And
Mhm.
really, that's how the Brewing Network was born. I didn't have some master plan. It just was kind of I was in the right place at the right time. I was a curious person, and I happened to know about broadcasting and recording, so I put it
Mhm.
all together.
Right.
So
At your
yeah,
garage.
in my garage. Yeah, I mean that sort of came second. Then I liked it, so I built a studio in my garage because I was, as you said, I was working at a radio station. I was going to school for it, so I I was a bit spoiled being around these professional recording environments, and I wanted one of my own. So my
Right.
friend helped me build it in my garage, and everything about it was professional except that we didn't have air conditioning. So for the first several years of the Brewing Network, and you can still ask my guests today, we sweated out in that studio.
Right. So you just leave that part to the mother of nature.
That's right. Yeah, I took care of good audio. Everything else was up to Mother Nature.
Cool, cool. All right. So yeah, so you've already touched a bit about the your thinking process of how you launch the Brewing Network. But the thing is like, so we're gonna talk about the beer and brewing media scene in the early days, right? So Justin, if you can still remember, can you please share us the kind of the landscape of what was like in US back then? Let's say pre 2005. Are you aware of any sort of media in US or maybe outside of US that revolve around beer and craft beer stuff?
Yeah, it's my understanding, and I wasn't into any of the beer until I started my own company, really, or at least that much into looking about it, reading about it. But my understanding is, of course, there was the American Homebrewers Association, which had Zymurgy magazine, and Zymurgy magazine was quite popular. And then there were a couple of Brew Your Own magazine was another one. Zymurgy, I believe, was first.
Yeah.
And then locally here in the Bay Area, there were beer newspapers. Celebrator Beer News had been around for probably 20 years by the time I started, and a couple others. Northwestern Beer News, they were up in the Pacific Northwest. And then you had beer forums. Back in 2005, the internet was really shaping up. It had gotten past its infancy, and you really went to websites for information by now. And there were forums with, just like there are now, with all that user generated content. So my understanding when I started my show was you could have a subscription to this magazine, which meant you only got the information that they fed to you. You could go on the forums and ask a lot of questions, and there you'd get a lot of good answers, but they were all from homebrewers. There weren't really pro brewers on the forums back then, and that's okay. The homebrewers had good information too. Or you went to your local homebrew club. Homebrew clubs were pretty popular, still are, in the U.S. at that time, and you went there to ask your questions too. But that was once a month. So if you wanted information on demand, you pretty much only had the forums, or hope that you had a friend you could call. And that was really the landscape when I had the idea to do a radio show, about an internet radio show, where I could bring guests on and ask them all the questions I had. And I wanted my listeners to be able to do the same. So we had a chat room so that they could come in and ask questions. So as far as I know, we were really kind of the first to have a live interactive sort of media like that revolved around brewing.
Gotcha. Because during my research in terms of beer and brewing media in the US before 2005, like what you mentioned, we have like a Zymurgy that can date the first issue back to like 1978, and then there is a huge gap before this BYO magazine is launched, which is 1999. And then fast forward to the internet time, we have this Homebrew Talk forum, which is, I think they were founded in 2005, which is pretty much in the same year that you launched the Brewing Network. And also the Brewing Radio guys too. But it's kind of in the first 5 years of 2000. So it is kind of probably, maybe in terms of communications, magazine and other newsletter is more like a one-way communication from the publishers to the reader, right? But to have a live radio, to have a kind of a broadcasting about beer is pretty much new. And it's like you will open the new gate for this type of media to be applied to beer and brewing world.
And I was really lucky, like I said, kind of at the right place at the right time. I happened to have gone to school for it. And in my broadcasting classes, my professors were instructing us to look past traditional radio. They were kind of saying to us, the internet is going to change the shape of radio, and us students should be paying attention to that. So as a class project, I built my first online radio station. So this was before podcasts existed. So you didn't really have a recording that you could download whenever you want. You did live streaming radio. And so that's what I built for school. And I did that right before graduation. So when I graduated, I had this radio station. I had this technology already existing. And then exactly what you said, I felt that an interactive show where people could call in, chat in, and get real-time answers to their questions was new. And to me, it was exciting too. I wasn't sure that people would want that. I just wanted it. And I thought that it would be fun and exciting to do. So I put together a cast of characters that I felt could answer all of the questions while having fun doing it. And that's really how we started. We didn't even start as a podcast. Podcast came later.
Right. Because I think that the early days you call yourself like live beer radio, right?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly right. We were live beer radio. I didn't even know what a podcast was. I'm pretty sure that the podcast technology started in 2005, maybe 2004. So right around the same time. And several months into doing my live show, my listeners started asking me if I could turn it into a podcast so that they could download it on their own time. And my answer was, yeah, sure. As soon as I figure out what the heck a podcast is, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I didn't know I had to Google it. And then that's sort of how it became a podcast, which was very helpful because back then not everybody could listen live. It would take me weeks to put up a recording of the show, and then you'd
Right.
have to go search for it on my website. And it wasn't until my listeners sort of guided me toward a podcast that we became even more popular because it was easy to listen to then.
Right.
So
Gotcha. And maybe I would like to sidetrack the story just a little bit. It's about your first studio in your garage. Is it true that for the soundproof thing you use like the egg box to help with the soundproof thing?
some of it, but it's worse than that too. My best friend who was living in the house, uh, he was a wrestler, like collegiate wrestling.
Really?
And
Okay.
wrestling mats have this really thick, dense foam so that you could
Okay.
throw your opponent down on the mat without breaking their back.
Mhm.
So he had all of these old wrestling mats that he get, and they were disgusting. They were like full of sweat, and I had to air them out in the backyard, but they were free
Mhm.
and they were an awesome soundproofing material. So I didn't own this house. I lined my landlord's garage in wrestling mat material. I
Okay.
stapled in the US here, if you want to buy new carpet for your house, you can get these big squares of carpet as samples. You just go to the carpet store. They give you all these color samples so you can see what it looks like. So
Mhm.
I would go to carpet stores and ask for their old samples. And I stapled all of those to the ceiling with some egg crates and you name it. And yeah, we just put together a makeshift studio. Yeah.
It
It
works,
wasn't
right?
perfect, by the way. If you listen to the old shows and a motorcycle goes by, you can still hear the motorcycle driving down the street. But for the most part, it worked.
Yeah, that was part of it. I mean, back then, in the early days. And
Yeah.
awesome. So in the early days, right, you also do, I mean, you mentioned that you did a live streaming award for CBC, back in 2007. You also do the same thing with NHC and GBF too, right?
Yeah, so it started with the Homebrewers Conference. I went to my first NHC in 2006, and
Hmm.
I offered to them for free. It wasn't video back then; it was just audio. You couldn't stream video back then.
Right.
So I offered to them, "Hey, I can stream this for you for free. I have the technology, just in case you want me to do it." And they didn't really care. They didn't think it was good or bad. They just said, "Well, if we're not paying you for it and you don't get in our way, go ahead and do it." And it turned out a ton of people tuned in because you really had a lot of homebrewers entering this competition, but not all of them could go to the conference. So they really found this value in streaming the awards. So I did the Homebrewers Conference first in 2006. Then I did the Great American Beer Festival Awards in 2006. And then it slowly moved into the World Beer Cup. And I just became the go to person for them to do it because I was the only one around, I think. So I got lucky.
Right. And that is probably because from you doing those traveling, and it's kind of the way to promote your platform too at that time, right?
So exactly right. And that's why I was willing to do it for free. I was going to these things anyway to promote the Network. I was new to the technology, so I didn't feel comfortable charging money for something I wasn't quite sure how to do yet anyway.
Mhm.
And yeah, we kind of just developed this relationship where it was mutually beneficial.
Right.
And over time, especially with the Homebrewers Association, we really grew together. with the popularity of my show became more members for the Homebrewers Association. So by the second year that I went to the Homebrewers Conference, I think their attendance doubled. And that wasn't just me. I just think together they were growing. I brought in a ton of new listeners because I had so much fun at the conference and I would talk to people about that on the show. And so we really just grew up together that way.
Right, and I bet it's going to be tons of fun times, out there during the on the road tour or live event from all of these events, because I've been pulling all the old photos of you and I show on the screen, and it looks fun and young too.
We look much younger, absolutely, much thinner.
Yeah.
It was a blast. I'm not going to lie. We probably had too much fun. I mean, those conferences were just, we were up late and up early, and we were going to talks and doing our own talks and partying. I mean, and we'd come back to the show with crazy stories that people love to listen to also. So yeah, I'm not going to lie. It was a ton of work and a ton of partying is basically what we did. It was my philosophy. Work hard, play hard.
Gotcha. And for the Sunday session, the first ever show that you created and produced, how do you come up with the co-host and the guest speaker? Like, what is your approach to build up this kind of team?
So with the co-hosts, I had a very specific vision in mind of all the things that sort of fell in my lap. That wasn't one of them. I really had a design for the show. And I built it off of some other radio shows that used to exist. There was a very popular show back in the late 90s and 2000s, and it was called Love Lines. It was a regular FM radio show. It had Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew, who now are very famous. But you would call into Love Lines with your love life questions.
Okay.
One of the hosts was a comedian, and the other host was an actual doctor, a real doctor. So you had these two perspectives, but if you had a real medical question, there was a doctor there to do it. And that's how I wanted my show. I wanted a cat, because I was there to ask the questions. I couldn't answer them. I was a new homebrewer. So I wanted something who had a scientific background and was a great brewer and could really answer every technical question that came in. And then I wanted a partner who was kind of funny along with me, someone who knew more about brewing than me, kind of that intermediate brewer, but could also tell jokes and say stupid things with me. And then there was me. And then my girlfriend who bought me the homebrew kit, she was just there to run the chat room. But she ended up having such a great personality. She was living with me. She had moved there from Germany. So she had this cute accent and a great outgoing personality and came from a beer culture. And so she became just as much of a character as everybody else on the show. And that was our little crew. We just really kind of built this connection so that we could cover every type of listener that would call in. And as for guests, it was either professional brewers who were willing to come on the show, or we would invite other home brewers to come on. So Jamil Zainasheff, for example, he came on one of the early sessions as a guest, and he was so knowledgeable. I mean, he could just answer everything. He had already won the highest award in the U.S. as a home brewer by that time, called the Ninkasi Award. And we got along so well that I offered him his own show almost immediately. I just said, you are so great on the show that if you want your own, I will produce it. I'll give it to you. And that's how the Jamil Show, Brew Strong, and Can You Brew It all came about, was through Jamil Zainasheff.
Yeah. Gotcha. So it's from your circle of concern, and then you kind of expand it out to the people that you have your eyes on and probably gonna click with you well, and right along with the Brewing Network group.
Exactly. So they were all at the local homebrew club. The local homebrew club, which is called Doze, was part of the local homebrew shop, which is called More Beer. And I had met them through going to buy my own ingredients. I had met these guys at the homebrew shop, and I was invited to go to their homebrew club. And I went to the homebrew club with this idea of mine. I said, hey guys, I need to ask you. I have this idea to do a beer radio show where I interview smart people like you and we get the answers out to people. And honestly, they all looked at me like I was crazy. They thought it was a weird idea. They didn't know who would listen. But the president of the homebrew club at the time was Dr. Scott. And Dr. Scott became my guy. He became my doctor that I
So
want. He's a dentist. He was a dentist, but still a doctor. But he knew all the science of brewing, and he was running the homebrew meetings. So I invited him. Hey, will you come do my first show with me? If you don't like it, no problem. But I just want you to come on and do my first show. And he loved it. He thought it was the coolest thing he'd ever done, and so he never left. He stuck with me. And the same thing, my co-host JP was from the homebrew club. And so, yeah, it was all from just going out locally and trying to learn more about homebrewing and seeing who might fit my vision of craft beer and the show.
Gotcha. And I heard that it took you a while to bring in the Great Tasty into the show, right?
Yeah, I had to beg Tasty to do the show for like a year.
Yeah.
So Tasty was already a homebrewing legend at the time in terms of he was just so nice, and he would share his information, and he was at the homebrew shop every Friday afternoon, and he'd go there to bring his beer so that the guys who owned more beer could taste it for him and let him know what to improve. And he had just been doing that. And I got to know him. We went to a homebrew festival together. I got to know him more. And I just said, hey, man, I really think you'll be good on the show. I think you could do it. And he just, no. And he finally said, yes, I'll be a guest. I'll be a guest one time. And he also loved it. He thought the format was cool. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. Now I have you. I've got you in my grasp. And he never left. He was a part of our show basically until he passed.
Right. Yeah. Love him so much.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one the next step based on my view for the Brewing Network is when you decided to build this hop grenades, right? So can you share us the background? Like what's happening in your mind? Like why you have to build this place up? Because for the listener out there, you might not know that the Hop Grenade, the full name is Hop Grenade Tap Room and Bottle Shop. So it's literally a restaurant that has beer bar and beer bottle stuff, and also a live record studio, which just didn't air from his side to this session. So please talk us through it.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact story, but it kind of started with a joke on one of the early podcasts. And somebody who called in or something from England had an apartment above a bar. And I was like, oh man, I would love to live above a bar. If I could just walk downstairs and have a beer. And then I got to being creative. Oh, and if I put the studio in the bar, that would be cool. And nobody ever offered me a bar. So the other thing, the only complaint I would get from listeners about my show really was that we were tasting all this wonderful beer on the show that they couldn't get. So they'd be telling me like, I'm at work listening to you drink beer and we don't get to have any of it. So I just started to develop this idea that maybe it'd be fun if my guests were in a studio that lived inside a bar. And then whoever we're talking to, their beer could be on tap or it can be in cans for sale. And that's where it sort of started. The other part, to be honest with you, is I felt I needed to diversify from just a podcast. The podcast industry was so young that I didn't know where it was going to go and if I could really make a prolonged living out of that. So I really wanted to capitalize on my knowledge and the time that I was there. And so the idea to have a bar just became more and more of a reality and something that I should try. And that's what we did. My producer at the time, Scott Moskowitz, came on board. And shortly thereafter, his family, who was rather wealthy and retired, they were looking for a retirement project. And they approached me asking if I'd be interested in doing this idea that I had been talking about. And that's kind of how it happened. In 2014, we finally opened the doors, and they helped me quite a lot. The Moskowitz family has been very good to me and helped me open the Hop Grenade, and we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this summer. So
Cheers to
yeah,
that.
yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, cool. So for those who who gonna have planned to visit like Concord, California, you should stop by this place. It is an awesome place and one of a kind. Good,
Thank
I would
you.
say good location, nice food, and tons of great beers.
Yeah, 21 taps and over 100 different bottles and cans. We do also have food, and yeah, if you're here at the right time, you can catch a live show in our studio.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right, so we're gonna go back to the topic more about the evolution of the media over time, right? So, Justin, like as you have been involved in this beer and brewing media for about 2 decades, in your view, from you what you have seen, how does the media reflect the beer and brewing scene in U.S. over this time?
This is a tough question for me because the media has evolved right alongside the beer industry. So the U.S. beer industry, craft beer, it's been on a little decline for the last couple of years. The first 10 years of the Brewing Network, everything was growth. So you saw new magazines, new newspapers, new events, new podcasts. All of that really went along with the increase in home brewing and craft brewing. And as it plateaued, magazines, just like the print industry in anything, they started to fail. They started to struggle gaining advertisers because digital media was more popular. So now you had new blogs and new websites and again new podcasts coming out. So digital kind of kept climbing while print plateaued. And then you saw print starting to go out of business and digital kept climbing. And so all of that kept happening until the last, 4 years, and probably 2019, where things really started to plateau. So I'm not sure how to say how craft beer has affected media or vice versa, other than the growth happened together, and that digital and print media suffered the same sort of consequences in this industry as every industry. It really just kind of paralleled. So, for example, I mentioned Celebrator magazine before, and they had been around for a couple decades before me. They're gone. Great newspaper, but they didn't quite make it through the print thing. And even the Brewing Network's, listenership and sponsorship has changed. It's kind of plateaued instead of seeing that awesome growth. So I do think we're very much intertwined. I think the media reflects people's passion for beer. And as that passion ebbs and flows, so does the media and the media avenues that you see. And that's probably the closest description I could give.
Gotcha. So, what about if we look in terms of the overall beer scene in US in general, like those macro scales? Because I'm not really sure how much they put themselves out there into the media in terms of the maybe like TV commercial during the Super Bowl or all sort of that stuff. Does it change over time?
So it does. That's a really good question. In the early days, you never saw craft beer in big media. You started to see places like New Belgium. They were one of the earliest who, and Sam Adams. They started to do print ads in bigger magazines instead of just beer magazines. You might have found them in a Sports Illustrated or something like that, and they were the first to do it. But that was rare, and that wasn't until they grew into one of the biggest beer companies ever. Even Sierra Nevada, who's one of the biggest craft brewers in the U.S., they still don't spend a lot of money on traditional media and advertising. But you did start to see Sam Adams, Goose Island, but they had gotten taken over by Anheuser-Busch. It kind of wasn't until places started to get taken over by larger beer companies that you saw them in traditional media. And I think I was watching the baseball game the other day, and I don't even remember who the brewery was, but it was a craft brewery, and I saw them on a commercial, and it blew my mind. Because to this day, you just don't really see craft beer in big media. Unless you're a very large company. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, because I remember like I would say my early day was maybe like 2015, 16, that when I came across the Brewing Network. And that was by accident because I was searching about beer and brewing stuff via the Homebrew Talk forum. And there was one of the thread, that pops up about maybe they are talking about the effectiveness of the Star San or PBW or some of the stuff from Five Stars Chemical, right? And one of
Yeah.
the posts, it's just like, okay, here's the quote from the interview from the Brewing Network back in 2006. And I was like, what is the Brewing Network, man? I've never heard
Nice.
about it. I start clicking it, and it just kind of like a snowball rolling effect, right? It's become larger and bigger and bigger. But like I bring this story up because I didn't even know that there is a beer podcast at 2016 from my early day. And looking back to that time is that okay, you start like 2004, 2005, and you kind of you say the first 10 year you see growth, and then it's going to be some plateau, and you just ride along with it, right? But on the other hand, not to put my finger on anybody, but like the Homebrew Talk, it was kind of active in the early days, and now it's more morphed into the other type of media, maybe like Facebook group or all Instagram, maybe TikTok. I'm not sure, but it
Yeah.
changes, right?
So that's a great point. Also, when we started, the Brewing Network built a forum, and the forum was part of our growth. And our forum blew up. It became as big as Homebrew Talk, almost as big as Homebrew Talk, almost as big as the More Beer. And our listeners were engaged, and they were there every day. I think right around the time Facebook became popular, as you're kind of mentioning,
Mhm.
that really changed. Social media changed the landscape of all media, and
Right.
certainly in the forums and things like that, because again, you could get some more immediate results. People were spending their digital time on social instead of their digital time searching forums. um, I do think that nowadays forums still play a really integral role, because you can go back and find some very specific information just by searching. And I do
Right.
that with every hobby I have. It's not just beer. Um, but yeah, that once social media hit, the landscape changed. Our listenership kept growing with social media, but our forum usership really took a nosedive almost immediately because we could interact with each other over social much easier.
Right.
So
Okay, so we're going to shift gear a bit, and we're going to talk about the impact that the Brewing Network has seen. So if you are an old time listener of the Brewing Network, especially when you guys still answer the question from the call in listener, I'm pretty sure that from time to time you will find that some of the callers are from outside of US, like Australia and other countries, right? And some of them even took their Monday off just to be able to join your Sunday session show like live. So how crazy was that, right? And um, so I mean, the Brewing Network not only gained the popularity in-house domestically, but you also gained the followers from the international listener too. So based on your experience, Justin, like, do you find any global impact that was influenced by the Brewing Network?
well, I mean, the best I can answer to that is, yeah, it was very surprising when we started to hear from listeners all over the place, and not just a couple. I mean, I thought, okay, we might have a couple listeners in Australia. We
Mhm.
had a huge following in Australia. And then we started to grow in Canada, and we started to grow in England. And yeah, people were changing their schedules to listen to the live show. And that really blew my mind. But I suppose the biggest impacts I started to see was when listeners started telling me they opened their own brewery.
Yeah.
And that wasn't just a couple people. Like, in droves, probably 5 to 8 years in, a lot of our listeners started opening breweries and sending us, hey, thanks for all the information. I couldn't have done it without you. Um, and some of those were international breweries. They were opening up in Australia. We were getting invited to places in England. And so I think, like anything, craft beer was going to spread no matter what. I mean, that's just how it was going to happen. We might have had an impact on how fast it spread. And again, that was just the availability of information. I mean, being able to go to my website, search through, and download a show on any topic you wanted by that time. I think that's the impact that we had. So just like anything else, you wouldn't think of it, but we're kind of an information technology company. If you were to really break it down, by the fact that we took this audio platform, made it searchable, made it easy to download, you could go on about your day, put some headphones in, and learn how to brew. I think we just helped expedite the process of growing beer. At the same time, this doesn't have much to do with the Brewing Network, but one of my best friends was living in Paris, and I got him so much into beer that he quit his job and opened the first craft brewery in Paris. And now there's a killer craft beer scene in Paris that he started. And so just sort of almost started with me and the Brewing Network because he really loved what we were doing. So, like I said, craft beer was going to keep spreading no matter what. I think we just helped it along. We gave it a little push, you know.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see, because I remember the first time, I heard, the caller from Australia. He was probably enjoyed the beer a bit too much, but he was having a great time over the show. But that was awesome. And in terms of the evolution, I also think that with time, right, even from yourself, you also become much more mature. So probably a certain vibe or thinking process may shape the way you groom your media too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you can't always just be like the drunken college kid. I mean, it served me well. Like that's how we started the Brewing Network, with a real personality, we had some attitude, and we liked to party. Our shows were 3 to 4 hours long, and I would always joke that was like 3 hours of bull and 1 hour of really good brewing information. But you had to get through the rest of it to get to the really good brewing information.
Right.
And over the years, our cast of characters grew older. Some have passed, some had to move on. And to me, your career also evolves. When you're going on 20 years of doing it, I can't just hang around making the same sort of adolescent jokes, even though I will from time to time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the industry grew up too. I mean, we just, again, it's all sort of in parallel. So as beer companies grew up and took themselves more seriously, as they started to have 20 employees instead of 5, as their beer reach grew across state lines, the whole industry was maturing. And if I didn't go along with that, we were going to get left behind too. So nowadays, yeah, my interviews are a little more subdued, and we're a little more serious. I don't have a giant cast of characters since COVID. That changed things. I mean, everything has to evolve, and I'm having just as much fun as ever. You probably wouldn't know it, because boy, did we sound like we were having fun in the early days. But I like my interviews right now. I like slowing it down. I like asking people how they figured out their career and how they're going to grow their tap room. In the early days, we were just asking about how to brew because no one knew, and we needed to get that info out. Well, now I think I've asked like almost every question about how to brew. And so I ask more in-depth questions about what might be next for your company and things like that. So,
right, and like what you just touched a bit about the pandemic, because that kinds of shaped the way people think. Because I think that's about the same time that you become more up to with this what I call the Zoom call with other people, and reach out to maybe people that you may not really know that well, have a broader gaze. That's what I can observe from your show.
Yeah, and look, I'll be honest with you too. So the pandemic did change everything, but I was changing before that. By 2019, I'm not going to lie, I had experienced some burnout. I had been doing this beer show for a while. I wasn't sure if it was for me anymore. I was getting a little bored. I was kind of struggling with it. And so I had come up with this idea, let's get me out of the studio. Let's hit the road. I basically bought an RV in 2019. I was going to get in that RV and drive all over the US and interview brewers where they live, in their hometowns. And I was going to do that for a year. I was going to take the show on the road, leave my cast behind, and get out there and just kind of see things and get like some fresh life into the show. So I bought the thing in like October 2019. Then I got invited to New Zealand in early 2020 to go to Hop Harvest. I did that. And the plan was to come home, get in the RV, and hit the road with the show. And while I was in New Zealand, the pandemic hit, and things have never gone back. It's never been the same again. And so those plans to be on the road for a year changed. The amount of time I had to spend running the Hop Grenade changed. And you just, like everybody else during the pandemic, you just kind of figure it out and you try to find yourself your way again. And I think that's what I did by slowing down the interviews. Now I do 1-hour shows instead of 3-hour shows. I do still get on the road, but only like short distances because I can't be away from the Hop Grenade for that long. And so in some ways, life just tells you and how your company's going to evolve. And I think that's what happened.
Got you. And is that plan still in check? The plan to drive around US, is it still there?
It is. It's still there, but I have no timeline for it because I now run the Hop Grenade daily. And that was, I didn't build the Hop Grenade to run it. I built the Hop Grenade to have a place for my studio. But now I run it. And so I can't be gone for months and months at a time. But I do see a future when things are still kind of settling down from COVID here in the Bay Area. Business is not back to what it was, so it's still we have to put a lot of effort into keeping the doors open. So for the foreseeable future, that's what I do. But I do see a time where, yes, my dream of getting the Brewing Network on the road for a good long time, a good year or so, I think that'll happen. Yeah,
I'll look forward for that. I mean, it's going to be.
Hey, I'll invite you along. You can do some of it with me.
Sure thing. Sure thing. All right. So we are at the tail end of the session, and I think I have the last question for you. So we touched a lot about the media scene, about beer and brewing back in 2000s and how it changed, how it evolved over time, and yes, we all agree, both of us, that we see changes, and it's going to keep changing because the community is something that is lively, not stagnant, stable, right? So from the Brewing Network lens, how do you see the future of beer and brewing media in the next maybe like 5 or 10 years?
This is a tough one, and I'm not sure I have the best vision for it. I might not be the one to do the next vision of beer media. I think video is much more important now than it ever was, as you're doing here today. I still resist video on my show. I do it every now and then, but I'm not the biggest fan. But I think video is super important. I think that beer and media are going to have to remain intertwined like they have, but I'm more curious what the next technology is that helps propel craft beer, and I honestly don't know what that is. You can see TikTok really blowing up right now, and at the same time the US is trying to ban TikTok. It's a weird time. It's a weird time for all times, but certainly for beer. For beer itself, I think hyper local is what we're going to continue to see thrive. These very small neighborhood breweries are going to keep opening. They're going to keep doing well. They're going to keep moving forward. I don't see the next days of a big Sierra Nevada or a big Stone Brewing Company. I don't see those coming along anytime soon. I think it's going to continue to retract, but people will find success with these small breweries. The media is just going to have to continue to play along with that and do small features and figure out how to showcase them. Again, back to me getting on the road. I mean, the perfect, I think, formula to find these small breweries is to get out there into small towns. So I wish I had a better I wish I had a better crystal ball in the pot, but I'm not sure I'm the one to ask. I think there's going to be some younger, smarter media people that are going to tell you what's next in beer media and shape it, hopefully in a way that I did. I mean, I'm proud of the way we helped shape beer media, and I think someone's going to come along and figure out the next thing.
Yeah, because it's hard to tell about the future, right? But at least you put your binocular and try to just scope out and see how things may change and how you're gonna adjust or adapt or right along with it just to make things continue working, right?
Yeah. And the beer industry needs it. The beer industry needs the media just as much as the media needs it. So I noticed, for example, the World Beer Cup this year got tons of media coverage.
Mhm.
I saw article after article, and from different states. Michigan breweries win 10 awards. California breweries take home 50 awards. You really see them latching on, and that's intertwined with social media. I mean, nobody's picking up the newspaper anymore. That's all just being fetched out there through different social media. And I was really happy to see that for craft brewers, that the World Beer Cup got so much coverage. I think that's important, and it's gonna continue to happen. It's just how we get into people's inbox. How do we get into people's attention on their smart device? And that's who's gonna be the part of the next wave.
Got you. So yeah, just have to keep your eyes on and do your best, to support each other in terms of the beer itself, the media itself, intertwine, like what you mentioned. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
something, yeah, to lift all the tide of the industry, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so Justin, do you have any final say for this topic?
Uh, I think I just kind of said it, that I'm just really hoping. I'm excited to see what happens next. For me, I'm going to be around for a while more. Don't worry. Like, the Brewing Network's not going anywhere, and we'll see how we evolve. I think we evolve into a travel show, eventually.
Mhm.
But mostly, I'm excited to see, who does, not just the media, but what brewer comes up with the next thing. Uh, Everything is cyclical, right? And so beer's just been on this. We enjoyed this part of the cycle for so long. Now we're having to figure out this part, but it's going to come right back. Beer isn't going anywhere. It never has. It never will. So it will be exciting to watch the next waves. And I think that new brewers and young people getting into the media, you guys are going to figure it out, and you're going to figure out stuff just like I did back then. And it's pretty exciting to watch. It's all going to be fun.
All right, cool. And I think that is a great closing speech for today's topic. Before we end this session, there is one thing I have to confess to you. It is
Okay.
about, when I start thinking about the name of this program, the Good Burp Session, somehow, it led to various moments that I can remember from listening to the Brewing Network show, especially when the one that Jamil was on, right? Throughout the conversation that you guys have, out of nowhere, there's gonna be some good, I mean, like loud burp noise. And that
Yeah.
somehow is gonna probably, pause the conversation, or people may complain about it, make joke about it. But that's kind of create, a good vibe, a good environment that I feel like it's feel very, very warm and welcome, and it show the personality of how your program is produced, but it's not in by intentional way, right? And
Yeah.
that's tell me is that, hey, I want to build this kind of a good environment for my session too, and that's become the thing. So I just start calling it this session as the Good Burp Session.
You have no idea how much that warms my heart. That's the coolest thing. I used to be embarrassed about some of that stuff too, but like I think you get it. I think you understand that we were just being ourselves and trying to create an environment that felt like you were hanging out with your friends
Yeah.
while getting to learn about beer. And so for you to say that and to adopt it as part of your show, man, I think that's the coolest thing.
So I mean, Justin, I mean, first of all, thank you for all the great work you've put out there, for the Brewing Network and all of your cast and your team member to it. It means a lot to me and a lot of my beer fellows here in my country. And I learn a lot from you guys, the brewing part, the media producer part. from a lot of the cast, Tasty, Doc, JP, Jamil, John Palmer, and all of the guest speaker that you have on your show. So I'm just going to keep looking forward for what you're going to put out, and I'm going to continue to be a supporter of your program and your show. Yeah. So.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for being a listener. We couldn't do it without all the listeners, and just thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. I'm proud of what we've done, and so it never goes over my head when people say nice things like that about how we've impacted. So I appreciate it, and thanks for letting me be on your show too.
All right, cool. It's it's really good to have you on, and we really thank you for your time, and appreciate the stories that you share about being brewing media. So thank you very much, Justin. Thanks for your time, and see you around later.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers. Okay, excuse me. Here we have it. Evolution of beer and brewing media. I would say through eyes of the veterans, because like what Justin shared, he's been in the industry for about 20 years, starting from when the internet was just become a thing. The podcast is the word that people, kind of unheard of, and he just right along with the thing that he has passion about, bringing people in, sharing the knowledge, sharing the stories about beer and brewing. It's also reflecting how society about beer in general changes over time, and still beer is going to be around for a while, and it is important for the side of the creating of beer and the getting the story of the beer out there, supposed to go together in the mutual way that's going to support each other and drive this the concept of building up this strong beer appreciating community, to be in a much more friendly environment and in a much more healthier way. So I think that's it for today's session, and let's look forward for the next topic that we're going to put out there probably in the next week or two. It's going to be something that worth listening to, and I wish you all the best. Grab a good beer and cheers to this episode. Until next time, stay tuned. สวัสดีครับ